dear adventurers. It's Dozing Knight. Welcome back to another quiet evening of shared tales and wandering through worlds unknown. In this gentle space between dusk and dreams, we gather once more at the flickering hearth of imagination, where weary minds find solace and weary souls are soothed by stories of distant lands and forgotten times. Tonight, we embark on an enchanting journey within the warmth of a humble, bustling tavern. Tucked away in a far-off corner of a peaceful village, this haven of conviviality whispers with the laughter of old friends and the clink of earthen mugs. Here, storytellers weave tales that dance like embers in the gentle glow of candlelight, carrying us on soft currents to places both familiar and wholly new. Our tale, Tales from the Tavern, will take you by the hand on a winding adventure through the lives of those who find themselves gathered at the worn wood of the tavern's tables. As travelers recount their stories, filled with magic, mystery, and moments of heart, we'll uncover secrets, murmured, and legends that live on in the folds of time. So, settle in, dear listener, as we open the pages of an evening's storytelling that promises to stir the imagination and warm the heart. But before we dive into the vibrant world of tales, I have a question to stir your own thoughts. What is the most memorable story you've ever heard that transported you to another world, even if only for a moment? Share your reflections with us. Your whispers are echoes that become part of our shared tapestry of stories, enriching each of our gatherings. As always, remember to subscribe so you never miss an evening's tale. Your support, your presence, is what makes these journeys possible. Thank you for being a cherished part of our adventures, and for joining hands with us in curiosity and wonder. Now, before we traverse into the merry chamber of the tavern, let us take a moment to prepare ourselves. Inhale slowly, taking in the peaceful air around you, feeling it fill your lungs with calm and comfort. Hold for a gentle moment, and now exhale, letting go of the day's weight, allowing your shoulders to soften, your thoughts to float and settle. Let each new breath be a step further away from the worries of the world, drawing you into a realm where imagination reigns supreme. Allow the mind to wander freely, unfettered by reality's constraints, and let the burdensome door-knockers of waking life fall silently away. With every breath, feel the quiet encroach upon your senses like the slow and steady rise of a beloved lullaby. Together, in this shared stillness of night, let us embark upon our tale. Close your eyes if you wish, dear listener, or perhaps watch the shifting shadows play along the walls. It is time to let the tavern's stories unfold. Now, let us enter the tavern, beloved sanctuary of voices and visions. As the door swings open, do not be surprised if you find your heart opening in tandem, ready to embrace whatever magic the evening holds. Here begins our adventure. Evening's hush descended gently over Willowmere, cloaking the village in a lavender haze as day relinquished its hold. The tavern, huddled where the worn road bent and the river's silver glimmer faded into mist, awaited its nightly awakening. Inside, the air lay still, a held breath before the dusk unfurled, and Mara moved quietly, reverently, as if participating in an old ritual. With careful hands, Mara lit the first lantern. Oil gleamed as the match's flame caught, and gold wavered across the polished counter. Newborn light danced on the grain of ancient wood, throwing soft halos against time-worn beams crisscrossing the low ceiling overhead. In the hearth's shadowed belly, embers awaited her touch, and with kindling and patience, she coaxed flames to life, watching them lap hungrily at their fuel until the fire's crackle offered its reassurance. Throughout the common room, warmth expanded, banishing memories of chill from the flagstone floor. Outside, evening deepened, transforming shapes beyond the milky windows into silhouettes. To Mara, the return of darkness was always welcome. It meant the world would come knocking, tired and travel-worn, seeking solace where lanterns flickered and bread was always warm. She set to her gentle preparations, linen cloths smoothed across tables, honey cakes arranged in little rows, a decanter of blackberry cordial set to rest beside a pitcher of cool well water. Crockery stacked beneath the bar glimmered faintly, awaiting the clink and clutter soon to come. Just then, the first stirring of the night began. A low murmur, the unaffected music of the tavern itself stretching into alertness. Quiet footsteps padded across scrubbed planks. Above, the building sighed as it settled anew, beams remembering seasons and winters and thousands of nightly awakenings before this one. With a soft sweep of her palm, Mara opened the sturdy oak doors. Out spilled lantern light and a ribbon of warm air, trailing behind as she propped the entrance open to the dying day. Old Joris arrived first, hunched beneath his patchwork cloak, shaking rain from the shoulders. His walking stick thudded reassuringly against the porch boards. Mara greeted him with a nod and a smile, her voice low and kind, and he shuffled to his usual seat near the fire, gruff gratitude hidden behind his shaggy brows. Not far behind, a pair of farmhands tramped in, cheeks ruddy from labor, exchanging sheepish greetings as they ducked beneath the threshold, boots squeaking faintly on the damp planks. Softly, the tavern's melody assembled itself. The snap of the hearth, the murmur of old stories, and the laughter of friends. A mother led her youngest, bundled in a woolen scarf, to a corner bench where melted candle stubs waited to be kindled into glowing puddles once more. Across the room, Mara poured cider for a stranger, her fingertips steady, voice a tranquil current amid the growing tide of sound. Beyond the sturdy walls, wind teased the eaves and leaves twirled in moonlit drafts. But within, the growing chorus of voices became a comfort, a promise that night, no matter how long, could become soft around its edges. Mara moved from table to table, a quiet anchor, replenishing bread baskets, delivering steaming bowls, listening to requests offered in gentle tones. With every word and every shared glance, the tavern became more itself, the soul of Willowmere quickening in the deepening twilight. As night pushed against the windows and more travelers arrived, each greeted by the golden pool spilling from the tavern's doorway, Willowmere came alive, not with commotion, but with belonging. Mara's lanterns, flickering safely in their sconces, stood watch like patient sentinels, guiding the weary to a place where evening could settle, finally into calm. The bones of Willowmere Tavern had stood for centuries, tenderly shaped by time and kindly hands. At the heart of its warmth was not only firelight, but the slow accumulation of stories soaked into every beam and plank. The ceiling's low, gleaming timbers bore scars from years gone by, knots and chips that hinted at long ago laughter and the weight of past winters. Here and there, The walls curved just slightly, an unevenness that spoke of hand-cut stone and gentle repairs made by those who cherished the tavern's quiet strength. Sun-faded tapestries hung beside leaded glass, their embroidered threads mapping landscapes now lost to memory. Along one alcove, the grain of dark oak told a map of storms weathered and celebrations hosted. Lanterns, their metalwork filigreed with tiny leaves and trailing vines, cast patterns across the flagstone floor, drawing golden lace upon the faded rug near the hearth. Stepping inside, a person felt not only the press of heat and the aroma of oak and stew, but the benevolent hush of a place that invited softness. At a round table beneath the largest window, regulars gathered as predictably as the sun's return. Old Joris, always closest to the warmth, sat patting his pocket for a pipe he'd inevitably misplaced, muttering to himself and flicking bits of tobacco onto the flames. Beside him, Rowan the candlemaker shared the news of the day, her voice honeyed and calm. Thomas, marked by a patch on his weathered jacket and hands scarred from travel, studied a scrap of parchment, half listening as he traced invisible paths between spilt drops of cider on the tabletop. Newcomers filtered in, gentled by the attitude of the room. The fire's steady glow gifted peace to those seated farther from its embrace. Mara saw to each arrival with an attentive ease. One guest needed directions to the inn across the lane. Another inquired after tea. A young couple, soaked from the walk beneath gathering clouds, settled on a settle beneath a wall of old horse brasses, fingers entwined and faces bright with relief. Mara fetched a basket of bread and a little pot of orange marmalade for them, and they thanked her with shy, grateful glances. One figure, shrouded in a dark traveling cloak, paused uncertainly just inside the threshold. Rainwater dripped quietly onto the mat at his feet, unnoticed as the hum of conversation enveloped him. Instead of striding forward, the stranger drifted toward a shadowed corner, sliding soundlessly onto a bench half hidden by a rack of traveling cloaks. No one stared or called out. In Willowmere, every arrival found space and silence as needed. Mara, noticing the new guest's reticence, offered a mug of warm, spiced milk with no words required, setting it just within reach before moving away. The tavern's rhythm continued. Forks clinked gently. The old cat, Moss, made the rounds as he always did, curling beside Rowan to accept wordless affection. A group of children, allowed an hour before bed, nestled in a window seat, playing a game of pebbles and whispering riddles into the growing candlelight. The walls seemed to bend protectively, sheltering them from the brewing tempest outside. Here, routine had its own tranquility. Every regular belonged in their accustomed nook, and every newcomer was gently absorbed into the tavern's slow swirl of contentment. The architecture's uneven lines became the language of comfort, the gentle sag of the beams, a reminder that age and imperfection were kin to peace. One could lean against the wooden paneling and feel something steadfast responding, a pulse running through the heart of Willowmere, unchanged by storm or shifting season. As lanterns cast their steady radiance, old friends reached the end of familiar tales and began them again, content to find fresh laughter in well-worn lines. All the while, Mara kept watch, moving through the old tavern with grace and surety, ensuring every soul, be they rooted or rootless, felt the steadiness of old wood and the promise of warm light. Night pressed close against the walls of Willowmere Tavern, wrapping the little house in a shroud of rain. Outside, a gentle patter played percussion on mossy shingles and slipped in silvery rivulets down ancient glass. Each window pane trembled with the rhythm of the world's hush, while wick-lit lanterns drew constellations on walls and ceiling. Inside, the air was fragrant and full, thick with the promise of sustenance. The great iron stew pot hung low over the fire, its wide belly bubbling in slow, fragrant contentment. Mara, tasting her evening's labor, stirred thyme and bay leaf with practiced care, allowing clouds of steam to escape and entwine with the earthy scent of roasting carrots and simmering onions. The aroma traveled through the room, drawing regulars and newcomers alike closer to the fire's glow. One by one, guests drifted towards the heat, shoulders lowered as the outside world and its clammy wildness faded to background music. Mara ladled generous portions of the stew into deep bowls and delivered them with a basket of dark bread, the kind of nourishment that settled into bones. At the largest table, Thomas passed a hunk of butter to Joris, who grumbled quietly, though, as everyone knew, he would later pronounce this evening's meal the best he'd ever eaten. The tavern's murmur grew richer, layered with the rise and fall of friendly conversation. Someone spoke of the weather, marveling at how the rain had chased the dust from hedgerows. Another, knees steaming near the hearth, recounted an older story of a stag glimpsed by moonlight, antlers silvered by dew. Rowan drifted into a tale about her candle-making grandmother, whose tapers once lit great halls and distant festivals. The words hung in the warm, close air, settling gently around every heart. The stranger in the corner watched all of this, hands encircling his mug. Raindrops still clung to his cloak, glimmering in the fire's patient glow. For now, he remained content to listen. A silhouette among silhouettes, his story yet to mingle with the others. Every so often, Mara would tip him a reassuring glance, promising with a nod that there was no hurry and no need to speak before ready. With the coming of night and the steady hush of rain, a hush of comfort overtook Willowmere. Moss, the cat, leapt onto the bench closest to the hearth, receiving a cushion from Rowan before folding himself into a ball of contentment. At the far end of the chamber, children unwound, drowsy and sprawled in cheerful heaps, their laughter softening into whispers as fatigue stole over them. Candlelight caught in the glass marbles scattered on their table, casting rainbow arcs on the wall behind. Mara watched all of this and felt a quiet pride. Each guest cocooned in their own little pool of warmth, some drawn to gentle conversation, others content with their own thoughts or the music of falling rain. She poured a last round of tea, her silver kettle whistling merrily, offering calm to anyone who met her gaze. Around her, travelers landed more softly, breathing easier, grateful for the shelter and the supper, for the slow pulse of a place that asked nothing but their presence. The rain's melody joined with the subtle music of the tavern, the pop and hum of the hearth, the clinking of spoons, and the timorous laughter of neighbors, greeting night not with lonely silence but with collected peace. As the storm outside grew no fiercer than the stories within, Willowmere Tavern offered itself as a haven, a pool of light, a hearthstone for wanderers, a world distilled into warmth and gentle welcome. Night deepened, and time paused briefly in the shelter of ringing bowls and gentle voices. Rain's endless whisper washed the world clean, and inside Willowmere's walls, every story found a place to rest. Thomas had a way of slipping through the low-lit tavern, as if he belonged to both the present and some far-off place, like a thread stitched through many patterns. Tonight, when Mara approached with her ever-steady tea tray, He grinned over the rim of a chipped mug, then reached beneath his woolen coat. A flick of his broad, calloused hand, and a bundle appeared. A map, its creases so deep you could have set a pebble in one and lost it for hours. He cleared a space on the communal table near the hearth, nudging aside empty bowls and a child's rough puzzle. With careful reverence, Thomas unfolded his treasure, faded parchment whispering over the grain, neatly spreading continents, forests, and rivers over the flickering gold. The map bore borders that no longer existed, mountains as sharp as old memories, and ink stains from journeys rerouted by storms and seasons. The fire painted dancing patterns across the cartography. Thomas, his eyes gentler than normal, tapped a place here, a twisted coastline, and murmured, "Once, there was a bridge built only by the tides. You'd stand here at dawn and be carried across on a bed of sea foam, if you believed deeply enough." Gregor, who rarely left Willowmere except to visit the market, leaned forward so his elbows rested among imaginary archipelagos. "Do you think there are still bridges like that?" Curiosity edged his voice, and for a moment, the years he wore like a winter coat seemed lighter. A girl named Lila, her shoes trailing water and mud, tugged at her mother's cloak and studied the colored whirls. "What about those forests, Thomas? Tell us, what birds sing in those woods, and do the stars look different above them?" Thomas smiled, crinkles deepening by his eyes. "In the Red Row woods, there's a nightjar whose call sounds like wind mixing with bells. And as for the stars, when you're far from home, sometimes the whole sky seems new." He traced a path through mountains called the Crowns, his fingertip leaving an invisible thread that the others quietly followed. The regulars leaned in, a circle drawn tight by shared wonder. Even Mara, setting a bowl of honeyed nuts nearby, couldn't resist glancing down, her lips curving as she caught sight of the inked rivers and impossible cities. The rain outside softened further, as if listening alongside the gathering. Thomas's stories wound slowly, inviting each listener to wander. He spoke of rowing across moon-silvered lakes where lanterns floated by the hundreds. He described dusty crossroads where strangers bartered in languages composed mostly of laughter and hands. For a while, age fell away, and childhood's hunger for far away returned to every gaze. A merchant passing through, the one with desert scarves and watchful eyes, offered a tale of her own. "In my country, we map the stars in sand before the dawn wind clears all records." She sketched a constellation with a few spilled grains from her bread plate, and others smiled, warmed by the echo of distant rituals. Kindness flourished across the table. Lila was invited to draw her own route with a stub of charcoal, dreaming a valley where wild horses ran. An old couple, travelers once and sweethearts still, pointed out a tiny bay where they'd first met, convinced the mapmaker must have borrowed a little truth from every wayfarer's memory. Thomas paused occasionally, the hush falling as comfortably as a blanket. The only sound was the breathing of the fire and the soft tap of rain on the shutters. Around the table, strangers became less so, joined by curiosity gently spoken, as they dreamed together of the unseen. Maps were told as much as drawn, and all at Willowmere contributed. Spices tasted, rivers crossed, and skyscapes imagined. Some shared dreams of places not yet traveled. Others found, simply in naming distant towns, a sense of movement and solace. Thomas, watching his little circle, found his voice growing softer, grateful for the glimmer in each face. At last, when the kettle's song echoed from the bar, Mara placed new cups among them and nodded at the map. "Best places are the ones we find together, aren't they?" she said. No one disagreed. All were content to travel safely but wildly, if only for a night, beneath Willowmere's old sheltering beams. Under Thomas's careful hands, the map folded away just as it had unfolded. A ritual closing of roads, the end of a quiet voyage. But the air in the tavern seemed changed, lighter, fuller, threaded through with the possibility of journeys yet to be taken, and the silent joy of imagining them together. At the far end of the tavern, pressed against the fog-clouded panes, Elise drew out her satchel as if opening a small, private world. The artist's presence was subtle. Brown curls damp from the rain, fingertips stained the blue-green of river water, gaze lingering on the transformation outside. Willowmere's windows wore a veil of condensation, turning lamplight and falling rain into soft, shifting mosaics. Elise unfolded parchment and lifted a willowwood pencil, poised so lightly it seemed the paper might exhale. Every so often, her eyes would flicker upward to catch the way raindrops raced each other across the glass, blurring the garden, the winding lane, the low field beyond in 1,000 watery mirrors. Word tickled around the tables. Elise is sketching again. And soon, a gentle trickle of guests found reasons to wander nearer. Gregor, still holding the image of Thomas's map in his mind's eye, settled where he could glance between sketch and storm. Mara, attentive from behind her counter, polished a mug and watched without intruding, her face quietly pleased. Elise's hand moved slow and measured, translating the hush of rain into curling lines and velvet shadow. She caught the way the trees bowed under the storm's tender weight, how the lamps outside burned halos of gold and amber through the watery gloom. Her strokes built a story the way moss grows across old stone, gradual, deliberate, softening every edge. Children pressed close, breath fogging the lower panes, each eager to glimpse what Elise saw in the world beyond. She smiled, patient and undisturbed, inviting them to name the figures appearing under her pencil. A shy fox beneath the hedge, a marsh wren perched on a bent cattail, the winding ribbon of the river curled tight as a sleeping cat. Eloise, the baker's wife, watched Elise's scene forming. She murmured memories of her own as the landscape grew, how the field haunted by mist was once bright with sunflowers, how, in childhood, the lane's puddles shone with starlight after storms. Elise caught these details as if gathering petals, weaving them into the quiet world swirling to life atop her parchment. Conversations at the window ebbed and flowed, old stories rising like gentle music, each drawn from a weathered face or the drift of the rain against wood. The outside world, its chill, its distance, the muddy wildness of the garden, became softened when seen through Elise's art. Guests discovered new comfort in the careful rendering of things half vanished by the storm, their anxieties muted by the transformation of damp, ordinary evening into something quietly magical. Even the storm's insistence became a lullaby, rhythm plucking the eaves as the tavern watched Elise conjure gentleness from the wild. Her page filled with the glow of imagined bonfires on distant banks, rain pooling in runnels, lanterns reflected twice, once in glass and once by her attentive hand. Soon, even those not at the window found themselves drawn by curiosity, or the gentle hush of voices in appreciation. A farmhand described a time when the creek overflowed and carp swam among the turnips outside. A teacher added tales of the snowdrops that sometimes braid winter's last gasp along the riverbend. Each story colored the page in ways only Elise could see, each memory a thread in her growing tapestry. When at last she lowered her pencil, the storm had softened to a whisper, and the windows seemed wider, the night beyond less forbidding. Elise turned her sketch for all to see, rain drifting through branches, shy animals molded from fog, lantern light pooling against midnight blue. The crowd exhaled together in a hush equal parts awe and peace. Mara set a plate of honey cakes nearby, her own small offering to the scene, and met Elise's eye with a nod. Around the window nook, old friends and strangers alike lingered, savoring the way Elise's drawing distilled the world's chaos into tender clarity, then offered it back as a kind of gentle dream. Long after Elise closed her satchel, talk lingered on the storm's artistry. Its patterns mirrored sky and earth. In that moment, Willowmere felt larger, its shelter extending beyond walls, the outside world invited in, transformed by a quiet marvel. Through rain-blurred glass and careful hands, the night was soothed and beautiful once more. As the evening shaped itself into something gentler, lanterns glowed in the corners, their amber halos soft against the shadows. Mara floated from table to table, moving with the grace learned only through countless twilight hours, her arms laden with plates of honey cakes and brimming potfuls of spiced cider. She placed offerings before each guest, a ritual of care that required no fanfare, only a smile and a gentle word. In the far alcove, the old musician, Ewan, leaned over his battered lute. Gnarled fingers tuned strings with patient, meditative adjustments. He let the soft din of conversation and crackle of the fire guide his pace, plucking here, tightening there, until each string hummed a note as steady as a heartbeat. Light from the lantern beside him dappled his silver beard and the polished wood, interweaving brightness and shadow. Conversation muted when Ewan's first gentle melody threaded into the room. Notes drifted upward, climbing through the hush, twining about beams and balancing atop shelves laden with dried herbs and carven mugs. The tune was a lullaby, the sort learned before memory, wordless yet brimming with belonging. Words gave way to peace, and even the most talkative guests found their tones softening, drawn into a quiet that brimmed with unspoken gratitude. One by one, posture grew supple, tension unfurled from shoulders and backs. Gregor, whose stories had run wild with Thomas's map, now nodded in time to the melody, his thumbs smoothing the rim of his mug in fluid circles. Little Lila dozed across her mother's lap, golden hair tangled in the crook of a caring arm, lulled by the sweet chords drifting overhead. Ewan glanced up now and then, catching Mara's eye. She met his gaze, quicksilver and kind, pausing to listen before returning to her endless dance among the tables. His music and her gentle presence formed the lifeblood of Willowmere, one measured in notes, the other in touch and taste, drawing the tavern's circle tighter with every quiet moment. At the foot of the hearth, embers cast a languid glow. Elise, fingers still faintly smudged from her earlier sketching, relaxed back, her mind painting imaginary scenes to match Ewan's soundscape. Sometimes she'd hum along, a harmony as light as moth wings, her voice a ribbon woven through the music and firelight. Mara returned with a plate of honey cakes, the pastries warm, drizzled with thick amber sweetness. Guests received them with murmured thanks, the cakes dissolving on their tongues, as if granting the taste of sunlight preserved for rainy nights. The smell of cardamom and honey rose above the coals, adding a gentle anchor to the fleeting threads of melody. Rain had lessened, but the window panes still wore their silver sheen. The outside world receded into softness, while within, the music expanded, filling corners where loneliness sometimes crept. Ewan's lute wove lullabies old and new, spun for children lost in dreams, farmers missing loved ones, travelers longing for fields painted gold in distant springtimes. After a time, words returned, but only in hushed waves. A lover's whisper, the slow retelling of a joke, the chair's wooden sigh. Between songs, Ewan sometimes shared a story. Nothing too loud, only the sort remembered when sleep begins to blur thought into reverie. He told of a herdsman who played to the stars and a village where music welcomed every traveler home. Light, shadow, and song gathered around every guest, knitting them into the tranquil spell. Mara, catching Thomas watching the scene with quiet wonder, refilled his tea and pressed a honey cake into his palm, not for hunger's sake alone, but to anchor him in this moment of belonging. It was a time outside of time. Even the hearth's last pop seemed part of the music, the tavern itself breathing quietly, alive in lantern glow, rich with the sound of restfulness. Ewan let his last chord linger, a promise woven through soft night, and in Willowmere's golden hush, all who heard found their burdens lighter. Lulled by song, safe by lantern light, the world grew a little kinder before the night settled in for good. A hush settled within Willowmere Tavern as the hour grew gently late. Mara moved quietly from table to table, tipping the brass snuffers to each lantern, leaving behind only the subtle glow of squat wax candles. They lined sills, their flames sending wavering halos across the uneven plaster and over the time-polished timber. In the deepening dim, flame and shadow toyed with the walls, painting the beams with languorous, slow-turning shapes. An old mural come quietly alive. In a corner, Greta, the retired seamstress who frequented the tavern each Thursday, set aside her empty mug and adjusted her spectacles. From her basket, she lifted a slim, foxed volume. With a steady hand, she smoothed the spine, waiting for the room's murmurs to dwindle towards stillness. When Greta began to read, her voice moved lightly through the candlelit hush, threading every syllable with care. She read not for applause or attention, but for the comfort of spoken words winding softly into the dark. Mara found herself pausing to listen as she polished a glass behind the bar. Greta's chosen tale meandered along country lanes, through meadows of tall grass and distant bluebells. Familiar, gentle images that painted the mind in watercolor calm. Every phrase she delivered seemed to slow the room a little further. Thomas at his table, Elise's pencil stilled, the just-finished strings of Ewan's lute, all breath and body seemed to lean toward the story. The candles performed their old magic, melting the evening into honeyed tranquility. Their flames sent shadows ticking across the faces of mugs and the joined hands on tabletops, while the fire in the grate rested in embers for a brief interlude. Outside, rain tapped quietly at the windows, each drop lending a subtle percussion to Greta's melodic reading. Old shutters narrowed the world, leaving only the tavern's interior, medicine amber and safe, as if time itself curled up for warmth among friends. Rituals blossomed in the gentle pause. Thomas smoothed the edge of his map, eyes half closed, following the gentle curve of imagined rivers with a finger. Elise returned to her sketching, translating candlelight and shadow into the traveling lines of her pencil, pausing occasionally to admire the effect of a drifting flame upon a jug's curve. At a distant table, the miller's son and his mother played their regular game, sliding carved wooden pieces across a battered board, voices barely whispers. Ewan absently tuned his lute despite not playing, a thread of quiet, private music under his breath. No urgency bristled here. Conversations inched along soft, well-worn paths. Chairs shuffled gently. A book's page turned with a gentle rustle. Even Mara's steps grew slower, her work shaped by the easy cadence of evening routine. She wiped down a table, pausing as candlelight caught on droplets, turning the blemishes of old oak to miniature stars. The tavern's familiar scents, heat from the embers, drift of fresh-baked bread, distant sweetness from wreaths of dried lavender, settled thick and tranquil in the air. Greta closed her book at last, marking her place with a scrap of ribbon. The room seemed to exhale. No one hurried to thank her. Gratitude pulsed softly in the unbroken silence, deeper than words. Mara refilled Greta's mug with mint tea and pressed her hand to the older woman's knuckles. A quiet acknowledgement. Nothing more. As deeper night crept around Willowmere Tavern's sturdy bones, the rituals anchored everyone to the present. The scraping of a chair as Elise stretched her legs, the gentle clink of a spoon against crockery, the lazy shiver of candle wax down its narrowing column, all bore witness to a sanctuary that thrived on slow, steady expectations. The candles burned low. Shadows, once playful, softened into outlines that blurred as eyelids drooped and breathing slowed. Mara stood at the door to the tap room for a lingering moment, eyes sweeping the softened scene. Each face, aglow with gold and sleep, seemed utterly at ease. Outside, the rain thickened the darkness, but within, every ritual, every flicker and sigh, carried the promise of rest. The tavern, wrapped in the gentle hush of old candles and the loyal company of shadows, waited in peace for sleep to find them all. As the clock in Mara's kitchen ticked softly toward midnight, firelight became the tavern's only lantern. No flames leapt now, only a deep, breathing red as slender embers nestled close together in the hearth's brick belly. The warmth pulsed steadily, a quiet heart that matched the slow, tranquil rhythm of Willowmere itself. Each crackle from the fireplace was a small comfort, surprising in its persistence, the sound threading through cups, low voices, and half-finished smiles. Around the dying fire, guests leaned in loosely knit circles. Benches pulled closer, shawls tucked around shoulders, care shed like an unnecessary coat at the door. Thomas, whose dreams so often wandered far beyond Willowmere, swirled his tea and told the simplest tale he could summon. He spoke of his first journey down these twisting roads long ago, and the relief that had filled his bones when Mara's laughter welcomed him in from a rainstorm much like tonight's. His story was not grand, only honest. Yet every eye reflected the soft glow, hearts beating in synchrony as his gentle words crocheted belonging around the group. Elise, always attuned to the moods in a room, laid her finished sketch on the tabletop for the others to see. It was not simply rain she captured, a wash of greys and blurred lanterns through mist, but the promise of comfort behind fogged glass. She did not speak, allowing the picture to serve as her offering. Ewan's hand drifted lightly over the strings of his lute, too tired for another song, but still finding music in idle notes that shimmered and faded before they properly began. The fire's heart, banked and slow, lent courage to stories too vulnerable for the earlier, livelier hours. Greta remembered her younger brother, lost long ago beneath an autumn sky, and spoke not of grief, but of the small kindnesses he once scattered like wildflowers. Glances, jokes, a gentle hand for a frightened child. Those listening did not interrupt, only hummed and nodded when memory or gratitude stirred. Mara, crouched at the hearth tending the coals, felt tears prick her eyes, born of something finer than sadness. Time no longer hurried. Cups were refilled without comment, and honeycakes broken and shared in quiet communion. Even those nearly drowsing, like the miller's boy, his chin balanced unsteadily on a folded arm, seemed comforted simply by the sounds. The soft, secret cadence of flames, the sturdy thud of boots crossing the rug, and the subtle percussion of hearts in calm alignment. Thomas's story finished. He listened next, head cocked in the firelight, as Elise explained how the shifting weather outside made her imagine faraway coastlines and wind-torn valleys. Her voice was low but certain, and in its gentle inflection, the others glimpsed traveling tides, new skies. For a moment, all their worlds expanded inside the unassuming tavern walls. Fear, worry, and fatigue lost their sharpness at the edges. Warmth blunted every shadow. Mara swept among the tables, collecting abandoned cups and clinking them together in a kind of muted melody. One by one, she checked that each guest had enough blanket, enough warmth. Behind her, embers pulsed with steady contentment, a beacon of home in the quietest hour. Thoughts grew fuzzy in the subtle lull. The stories winding down now were smaller, a remembered kindness from childhood, a softly quoted poem, the silly mischief of kittens in a hayloft. These exchanges were quieter than laughter, but left the heart fuller. Windows showed only blackness and rain, but for those inside, the night felt gentle, threaded together by trust, familiarity, and the ember's crimson reassurance. Greta tipped her head onto folded hands and breathed out a wordless sound of peace. Thomas wrapped and unwrapped his map, then left it spread on the table as though he might journey again tomorrow. The painter returned pencil to pouch. Embers settled into silence. The fire needed nothing more than watching now, its heart a single line of red, pulsing slow as a lullaby. All around, guests lingered in the comfort of kindred souls and the delicate, steady heartbeat of Willowmere. In such a place, the darkness outside could not intrude. Inside, all was well, each life brightened by the hush and the warmth. A promise, here in the deep of night, that tomorrow would dawn gentler for them all. It was Mara, as always, who guided the tavern gently toward rest. She slipped amid the shadows, gathering plates and tucking stray shawls onto pegs. At each table, she stooped to lay a hand on rounded shoulders, her touch as light and sure as any lullaby. In the final hour, the tavern felt neither empty nor alone, just folded tenderly, guest by guest, into the hush of Willowmere night. Thomas, lingering by the drowsing coals, rolled up his battered map with careful fingers. He took an extra moment to press the creased edge flat, as though pinning a memory in place. Mara paused beside him, offering a smile and a last splash of warming tea. "Rest well, traveller," she whispered, her words only for him and the fire. Thomas nodded, his answering grin touched by gratitude, and he slipped the map into his coat as he stood, ready for sleep or for dreams that might yet wander farther. Candles dwindled, one by one. Mara cupped her palm to the last fat waxen flame and snuffed it with a practiced twist, so the smoke spiraled up and faded seamlessly into the night. Around her, the regulars and new arrivals gathered the pieces of themselves. Elise rolled her sketches and tied them with a blue ribbon. Greta, blinking herself back from reverie, pressed her book to her chest and murmured a good night to anyone listening. With practiced care, Mara fetched blankets from the low chest beside the bar. She draped thick folds over shoulders and knees, checked every window latch with a quiet hand, and turned the lock to shield her home from the deepening dark. The smallest chores became gentle rituals, mugs stacked in a careful tower, spoons clinking softly in a wooden bowl, chairs turned in to rest their tired legs against the table's edge. Every motion slowed time, weaving the end of night with patient reassurance. Close by the hearth, the miller's boy had at last lost his fight against sleep. His mother lifted him gently, nodding quiet thanks to Mara as she led the way to the back room where straw mattresses awaited. Greta pressed a folded shawl into Elise's lap, convincing her to rest a while before braving the storm. Each exchange felt deliberate, a silent promise to make the world kinder before sleep stole everyone away. In the dim, Mara moved from guest to guest, her words more often gesture than sound. She plumped pillows, tucked the corners of wool throws, and sometimes stooped to collect an errant slipper or straighten a cushion. Candlelight lingered in puddles along the tabletops, bronzing sleeping faces and painting halos around shoulders soon to surrender to dreams. Ewan, storing his loot carefully by the bar, caught Mara's eye as he masked a yawn. "Singer's luck for morning," he teased, voice no louder than the sighing door. Mara grinned, inclined her head, and hummed 3 sleepy notes, just enough to send the last echoes spiraling up into the beams. Thomas and Greta echoed their goodnights, soft-voiced, and moments stretched out in grateful silence. The rain pressed on, a patient rhythm drumming above and beyond the sheltering roof. All through the tavern, gratitude pulsed, an unspoken thanks for the warmth, for the stories and small kindnesses, for the chance to rest beneath Willowmere's sturdy eaves. As Mara extinguished the final stub of candle, the darkness left behind was neither cold nor empty. It felt gentle, feathered with care, expectant with peace. In this closing hush, every heart grew lighter, as if the very air carried something of hope or gentle blessing. Mara stood for one last moment by the hearth, hands on hips, surveying the circle of slumbering shapes. The old boards creaked as she shifted, then stilled with her, settling into rest. Outside, the world remained vast and shadowed, but inside, the tavern slept beneath the kindest beams, each whispered farewell lingering, caught and cradled by the steady heart of Willowmere. Tomorrow would come, and the doors would open anew. But for now, every room, every guest, and every corner held close the sweetness of the night's end, an embrace woven of peace, candle smoke, and the low, steady drumming of the rain. In the gentle lull that follows farewells, Mara moved quietly through Willowmere's familiar spaces, her footsteps softened by sleep and memory. Her hands, long practiced in comfort, gathered stray cups from tables and tucked a blanket a bit tighter around a dozing guest by the hearth. Only the hushed clatter of her motions lifted above the steady song of rain. The tavern, now emptied of voices, felt vast and intimate at once, as if it stretched in all directions, not in size but in possibility. First, Mara turned to the eastern window. Dawn was still distant. The night had settled, deep and mild as wool, cloaking the hills outside. One by one, she drew the shutters in with a patient, practiced touch, each wood panel gently eased into place. The iron latches caught against grain smoothed by years of opening and closing, each closing a thread woven into the tapestry of countless evenings. As the last window was shuttered, the tavern ceded itself to the silver hush, tuned for dreaming. Mara stood for a moment, letting her fingertips rest against cool wood, feeling the drum of rain slow its tempo on the other side. The lantern at the bar, Willowmere's last beacon, cast a golden pool across the polished counter. Wax had trickled down its side, pooling in quiet shadow. Mara watched the flame tremble, then reached up to grip the lantern's brass cap, her shoulders warmed by the memory of friendly gatherings. With a gentle twist, she dimmed the wick. The flame, bright and faithful, bowed and sighed, then dwindled into a red-gold thread before finally releasing itself to dusk. For an instant, Mara could almost hear the last exhalation as a blessing, a promise that light would always return. She stood still, waiting for her eyes to become at ease with darkness, for new shapes to emerge, outlined by moonglow and starlight. With the lantern out, the only illumination now was borrowed, thin ribbons slipping through the cracks around the shutters or leaching silver on the slanted roof. Starlight painted soft shadows on the ancient beams above, and every plank of the tavern's bones seemed scattered with tiny pinpricks of hope. Outside, the rain whispered its lullaby across the thatch and cobblestones, a patient hand stroking Willowmere's old, trusted roof. Occasionally, a drop would strike the window glass with a tender insistence, or the wind would sigh along the eaves, and the whole building breathed in rhythm, a great animal at peace. Beneath that sheltering pattern, Mara heard the gentle shifting of her guests as they surrendered to sleep, the small sounds of comfort, a slow, evened breath, a contented sigh, the soft rustle of a blanket being pulled up. In the kitchen, a few bowls waited to be washed in the morning, shelves patiently lined with herbs and honey that would sweeten new days. Mara glanced at her apron draped over a chair, allowing herself a proud, simple smile. She took a final walk through the shadowed common room, hands skimming the tops of chairs, paws lingering at the edges of each familiar table. There, Thomas's old satchel rested, tucked firm and ready for whatever dawn would bring. Over by the window, Elise's pencil and notebook lay in a pool of dim light, her sketches pressed closed, safe inside. One by one, Mara checked each tucked-away corner, her movements gentle as dusk itself. In the dormer rooms upstairs, she listened a moment at the door, reassured by the calm, sturdy silence within. Downstairs, the hearth still held the memory of flame. Embers glowed, sheltering a pocket of warmth, slow and content as a heartbeat. At last, Mara returned to the center of Willowmere, and for just a breath's length, she stood completely still. Here, in the muted glow, the hush of a place well loved, she let her own burdens slip gently away for the night. Here, in this pocket of shelter and story, she belonged not merely as caretaker, but as a keeper of dreams. Outside, the rain softened into mist. Starlight flickered through breaks in cloud, tracing a gentle scatter across the rooftop. Above, the ancient sign, a willow traced in fading paint, swayed just once, then stilled. Every guest slumbered peacefully. Every story told tonight drifted and mingled, weaving through slow breaths and deepening peace. Mara's own eyes grew heavy as she breathed in the quiet. She slipped upstairs, the stairs creaking softly, and lay beneath a quilt woven by her grandmother, letting the weight of night fold around her. Willowmere murmured, a low, sweet promise humming through wood and stone, until, within and without, the tavern surrendered at last to pure and restful quiet. Stories lingered in the beams, hope gathered in the corners, and sleep wrapped Willowmere in its gentle silver embrace.